"I don't understand why you're clinging to all this, Dad," my son said, standing in my living room with that tone he always used when he thought he was being reasonable but in fact was issuing instructions. "The house is too big for you. The car is a burden, and you don't need to keep so many things. You should sell everything and live simpler, more modestly. What are you holding on to?" I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I looked past him, at the window, where the late morning sun spilled onto the curtains I'd chosen with my own hands years ago. His words lingered in the air like dust in a quiet room, heavy and unavoidable. Finally, I forced a small smile. "Because this is my life," I said simply, "and I'm not ready to pack it into a box just yet." He sighed, shaking his head the way he always did when he thought I was being stubborn. "You don't understand. It's not practical anymore." Practical. That word again. Always practical. He said it as if it were some kind of law, as though practicality outweighed memory, outweighed dignity, outweighed the right of a man to live the way he chooses. That exchange had become our routine. Every visit, every phone call, every strained dinner when he and his wife came by, the conversation circled back to the same theme: sell, simplify, downsize. I no longer argued with him loudly. What was the point? I had learned to reply with calm words, to let him think I was listening, even while inside me something grew heavier each time. The knowledge that to him, my home and possessions weren't my life's work, they were assets waiting to be disposed of. My name is Ricky, and I am 71 years old. I spent my life as a manager in a logistics company, 4 decades of keeping schedules aligned, employees in line, and shipments on track. It was not a glamorous career, but it was steady, and it allowed me to raise a family, build a home, and retire without debts hanging over me. For years, my life was defined by movement, by responsibility. Now it is defined by silence. My wife and I separated long ago, in a way that was more weary than bitter. We had grown apart, each of us, retreating into our own corners of life until there was no reason left to pretend otherwise. She moved closer to her sister. I stayed here, in this house. My son grew up, got married, and stepped fully into his own life. I thought at first that his marriage would bring him happiness and stability, and perhaps it did. But it also created distance. He visits, yes, but less to see me than to remind me of what he thinks I should be doing with my property. The irony is that I live well enough. My pension is decent, my savings comfortable, and the house is in good shape. I have everything I need. But comfort does not erase loneliness. The days pass in a silence so thick it sometimes feels like a second skin. I wake, I eat, I tend to small tasks, I sit in the garden, and the hours stretch out. A house that was once filled with the noise of family now echoes with the sound of nothing. That morning, after my son left with his usual complaints still ringing in my ears, I turned back to preparing for something different. For once, there was a reason to leave the house, a reason to dress well and look forward to something. My old friend, also named Ricky, though people call him Big Ricky because of his size and booming laugh, was having a birthday in the neighboring town. We had worked together years ago. He was younger, livelier, quick with a joke when I was buried in papers and deadlines. In those days, we would escape the office together for a cigarette or a quick drink after work, two men in a storm of schedules finding shelter in friendship. When retirement scattered us, most old colleagues drifted away, but not him. He called, he visited, and every year on his birthday, he reminded me that I was expected. So I prepared. The night before, I ironed a shirt, light blue, the one that still sat well on me despite my age. I polished my shoes until they shone faintly, a habit I couldn't shake even though no one really cared anymore. I had found him a gift weeks earlier, an old edition of a book he once told me he loved, tracked down in a second-hand shop after much searching. I wrapped it carefully in brown paper and tied it with twine. Simple but neat. That morning I rose early as always, my body still trained by years of work to greet the day before the sun fully climbed. The house greeted me with silence, the kind that presses on your shoulders, but I tried to ignore it. I brewed tea, strong, with no sugar, and ate 2 slices of bread with butter. At the window, I watched the street as I drank, seeing neighbors leave for work, children rushing to school. Their lives moved with purpose. Mine felt like it stood still. Yet today was not for dwelling on that. Today, I told myself, was for friendship. Still, as I dressed, my son's words crept back into my mind. Sell the house, sell the car, live modestly. He said it with the confidence of someone who thought he knew better, but I couldn't help but wonder what lay behind it. Was it concern for me? Or was it calculation, a subtle way of pressing me toward decisions that would ultimately benefit him and his wife more than me? I shook the thought away. There would be time enough to worry about that later. For now, there was a shirt to button, shoes to lace, and a short trip to make. I checked the mirror one last time. My reflection showed an older man, lines etched across his face, hair graying at the edges, but eyes still steady. I placed the wrap book into a bag, took my keys, and stood at the door. The house behind me was silent as I locked it, the heavy click of the bolt echoing in the morning air. I paused on the porch for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, listening to the faint hum of life from the street beyond. For a day at least, I would leave the silence behind. I had no way of knowing as I stepped off that porch that the silence I carried with me would soon be replaced by something else entirely. A storm that would begin with my son's persistent words and grow into actions I could never have imagined. But that part of the story was still ahead. For now, all I wanted was to see my friend, to laugh again, to feel, if only for an evening, that life was still more than a waiting room. The road stretched ahead of me, wide and quiet, the kind of drive that leaves a man alone with his thoughts. But I pushed those thoughts away. I refused to let my son's words echo in my head today. No debates about selling the house, no rehearsed speeches about practicality, no bitterness. Today wasn't about him. Today was about friendship. On the seat beside me lay the gift I had chosen with care, an old edition of a book my friend Frankie loved, something I had spent weeks hunting down in second-hand shops. I kept glancing at the package as if reminding myself that this trip had a purpose beyond escape. I was going to celebrate a man who had never once asked me to sell a thing, never once treated me like a burden. The farther I drove from my own town, the lighter I felt. Fields blurred past the windows, and the hum of the engine filled the silence in a way that felt comforting instead of oppressive. By the time I reached the city where Frankie lived, the tension in my chest had lifted, and the arguments with my son seemed distant, almost unreal. Frankie's house was the same as always, modest, with a slightly overgrown yard he insisted gave it character. When I parked in front, I could already hear voices spilling out from inside. The front door swung open before I even stepped onto the porch. There he was, Frankie. Broad shoulders, graying hair, a belly that spoke of many hearty dinners, and that same booming laugh that had once filled the corridors of our workplace. "Ricky!" he shouted, sweeping me into a bear hug that nearly crushed my ribs. "Look at you! You clean up better than any of us. Come in, come in!" I laughed, steadying myself. "Careful, Frankie. You'll break what's left of me." "Nonsense," he grinned. "You're tougher than steel." Inside, the house was alive with warmth. A dozen people filled the living room and kitchen, glasses in hand, plates of food balanced on laps. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread floated through the air. Laughter overlapped with music playing softly from a radio. For the first time in months, I stepped into a room where silence had no place. "Sit here," Frankie ordered, pulling me to a chair near the table. "Drink first, food after." A glass of wine appeared in front of me before I could protest. I settled in, letting the noise and the warmth soak into me. It had been too long since I'd been part of a gathering where people wanted nothing more than to talk, eat, and laugh. The evening unfolded like a memory come back to life. Old colleagues reminisced about the years we'd spent at the company. Someone laughed about the time Frankie and I had tried to fix a broken loading dock ourselves when no one else dared touch it. Another recalled how we used to sneak away for smoke breaks, only to be dragged back inside by supervisors who pretended they didn't know we were the ones holding the operation together. Stories flew around the table, each one met with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I felt my own laughter rising easily, naturally, as if the years had melted away. For once, I wasn't the old man defending his home, or the father accused of stubbornness. I was simply Ricky, a friend among friends. When I handed Frankie his gift, his eyes widened. He tore the paper carefully, revealing the book. His rough hands smoothed the cover, and for a moment, his booming voice fell quiet. "You remembered," he said softly. "I told you about this years ago. I never thought I'd hold it again." "Some things stick," I replied. He slapped me on the back with a force that nearly toppled my wine. "This, my friend, is better than any cake." Hours slipped away unnoticed. Plates were filled, emptied, and filled again. Laughter rose and fell like music. Frankie's grandchildren darted between the adults, squealing with delight, while his wife moved through the room like a conductor, ensuring the evening stayed in harmony. At one point, I stepped outside for air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky. Frankie followed me out, 2 glasses of whiskey in his hands. "Tell me, Ricky," he said, handing me one. "How's life treating you?" I hesitated. The truth hovered on my tongue, the loneliness, the pressure from my son, the gnawing silence at home. But looking at Frankie, at the joy glowing in his face, I didn't want to darken the evening. "It's quiet," I said at last. He chuckled. "Quiet's not the worst thing. I'd trade for quiet sometimes. My grandkids turned this place into a circus." He clinked his glass against mine. "But you came. That means you're still moving, still living." We drank. The whiskey burned pleasantly, chasing away the last shadows of doubt. By the time the evening wound down, I was exhausted in the best possible way. Frankie insisted I stay the night. "Don't argue, you're not driving back in the dark." And I agreed easily. The guest room was small but warm, the bed soft enough to cradle me into sleep. For the first time in months, I drifted off without the weight of loneliness pressing against my chest. The morning brought sunlight through the curtains and the faint sound of movement downstairs. I dressed slowly and joined Frankie and his wife for breakfast. She fussed over me as if I were family, loading my plate with eggs and toast, scolding Frankie for trying to sneak extra bacon. I let myself sink into the comfort of it. We lingered over coffee, talking about gardens, neighbors, plans for the summer. The simplest conversations felt like treasures. But as the minutes stretched on, a thought crept into my mind. Bruno, my dog. He was a sturdy shepherd mix, loyal as the day was long. I had left food and water, but I had also asked my son to check in, to feed him properly. The thought of Bruno waiting by the door or whining with hunger gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore it. I excused myself and stepped outside with my phone. The line clicked, and my son's voice answered, smooth and practiced. "Dad." "Just checking," I said. "Did you feed Bruno?" "Make sure he's all right?" "Of course," he said easily. "Everything's under control." Something in his tone was too casual, too rehearsed. Before I could press further, he added, "Actually, when you get back, you'll find a surprise waiting for you." My chest tightened. "A surprise?" "Yes, Don't worry, it's good news. You'll thank me. I gripped the phone tighter. You'll thank me. He had used those words before, and they never meant what they sounded like. I forced a chuckle. All right, I'll see soon enough. But after the call ended, the unease stayed with me. Frankie's home was full of warmth, laughter, and life. Yet somewhere back in my own town, a shadow was moving quietly through my house. My son's surprise was waiting, and I already feared what it might be. The morning after Frankie's birthday, the house felt quieter but still warm, carrying the faint traces of laughter from the night before. I had slept more soundly than I had in months, and as I sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, I found myself wishing that silence at home could feel like this. Full, comforting, alive with memory, instead of hollow. Frankie walked in, already dressed, humming some tune to himself. He sat across from me with a grin. "Ricky, I've been thinking. My boy's been talking about saving up for a car. He's still driving that rust bucket from college. For his birthday, I want to surprise him. A decent used car, nothing fancy, but reliable." I raised an eyebrow. "You're braver than me. Buying cars online? That's a maze." "Ah, that's why you're here," Frankie said, already pulling out his laptop. "You've always had the sharp eye for details. You'll spot the scams before I do." I chuckled. "And here, I thought I came to relax." "Relax with purpose," he shot back. We set the laptop between us on the table. Frankie navigated to a popular used car website, the kind that had page after page of listings with bright photos and bold claims. We began scrolling, half serious, half joking. "Look at this one," Frankie said, pointing at a shiny silver sedan. "Low mileage, one owner. Says it was only driven to church on Sundays," I snorted, "and probably through a war zone in between." We laughed, moving on. Car after car scrolled by. Some were obviously overpriced. Others were suspiciously cheap. Frankie muttered to himself, weighing pros and cons, while I played the skeptic, pointing out the little signs in photos. Worn pedals, rust along the wheel wells, odd angles meant to hide damage. It was almost fun until the next page loaded. And there it was. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned forward, staring at the screen. The photo showed a car parked in a driveway, sunlight glinting off the familiar dark green paint. My car, my Buick. I knew it instantly, not just by the color or model, but by the small dent near the left fender. A mark I had lived with for 10 years after a careless driver had clipped me in a parking lot. I had refused to fix it, a stubborn reminder of the day I'd refused to let a stranger's mistake ruin my pride in the car. And now, there it was, polished and posed as if it belonged to someone else. The ad read, "Classic Buick, excellent condition, well-maintained, serious buyers only." The price was high, but fair. Too fair. My hand trembled as I pointed at the screen. That's my car," Frankie frowned. "What are you talking about?" "That's mine," I whispered. "That's my Buick. The dent, the color, even the plate frame. I put that frame on 20 years ago." Frankie stared, then looked back at me, his expression shifting from confusion to outrage. "You're telling me your son, he put your car up for sale?" I swallowed hard. My chest tightened with a mix of disbelief and anger. My son's words echoed in my memory. "You'll thank me. It's a surprise." I had thought he meant something trivial. A change in the house, maybe. But this? Selling my car without a word? "I can't believe it," I muttered, shaking my head. "I didn't sign anything. I didn't agree. And he just put it out there like it's his." Frankie slammed his palm on the table, startling me. "This is too much. Pressuring you to sell the house I could almost excuse as stupidity. But this? Selling your property behind your back? No, Ricky. Number?" He's crossed the line. I sat there in silence, my stomach twisting. The car wasn't just a vehicle to me. It was years of my life. The long commutes to work, the late-night drives back from business trips, the vacations I'd taken with my son when he was still a boy, sitting in the passenger seat asking endless questions about the world. That Buick had carried pieces of my life in its worn seats, and my son thought it was nothing but a burden, something to get rid of. He thinks he's doing me a favor, I said bitterly. That's what he always says. You'll thank me. Frankie leaned closer, his voice low and firm. Then it's time someone showed him what a real favor looks like. I looked up, meeting his eyes. What do you mean? I mean, he said, tapping the screen. I'm going to buy this car, I blinked. What? You heard me, Frankie said. If he wants to play games, then let's play. I'll put in an offer, make it look clean, no questions asked. Once the deal goes through, the car will be mine on paper, but really, it'll still be yours. And when the time is right, we'll let him know just what he's done. The idea hit me like a jolt of cold water. You'd do that? Frankie smirked. You bet I would. He needs to be taught a lesson. You don't take advantage of your father, not while I'm around. I leaned back, trying to process the mix of anger and relief coursing through me. Part of me wanted to confront my son immediately, to demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part that had grown tired of endless arguments, realized Frankie was right. Words hadn't worked. Maybe action would. What if he finds out it's you? I asked cautiously. He won't, Frankie said confidently. I'll use a different account, pay in cash, whatever it takes. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late. The paperwork will be done. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. Frankie took down the seller's contact information, my son's, though listed under some neutral name. He made a few notes, strategizing as though this were just another negotiation, another business deal. I sat quietly, my thoughts churning. Seeing my car listed like that had been like being erased piece by piece. My son hadn't just ignored my wishes, he had stripped something from me without a word. But if Frankie was right, this wasn't the end. It could be the beginning of something else. As I stared at the photo on the screen, my anger hardened into something sharper. My son thought he could manage me, reduce me to nothing more than a collection of sellable items. But he had forgotten who I was, a man who had managed crises, solved problems, and survived 40 years in a company that ate weaker men alive. And now, with Frankie at my side, I would remind him. The days after Frankie discovered my car listing blurred together, heavy with unease. I lingered at his house longer than I had planned, partly because the laughter of his family softened my thoughts, partly because I dreaded returning home to face the truth. Every morning I would sit with him over coffee, staring at the laptop where the listing still glared back at me. My Buick, paraded online like it belonged to someone else. Frankie, however, wasted no time. He was a man of action, always had been. Within a day, he had made contact with the seller, my son. He kept his tone casual, posing as just another buyer looking for a reliable used car. The conversation went smoothly, too smoothly, and by the end they had arranged to meet in person. You're not coming, Frankie told me firmly as he closed his phone. My head snapped up. What do you mean I'm not coming? That's my son. That's exactly why, Frankie said. If you show up, he'll smell something's wrong. He knows you. He'll see it in your face. Let me handle this. He thinks I'm just another stranger with cash. That's how we catch him. I wanted to protest, but deep down I knew he was right. The night before the meeting, my son called me. His voice was unusually light, almost forced, as though he were trying to sound casual but couldn't quite pull it off. Dad, he said, listen, you don't need to hurry back. Stay another night or two. Enjoy yourself. Don't worry about anything here. I've got everything under control. I frowned. Everything under control? What do you mean? Oh, the dog, the house, just everything. Really, Dad, relax for once. You deserve it. His words landed clumsily, like a poorly rehearsed speech. I could hear the cracks in his voice, the nervous energy. He wanted me gone, out of the way. What's the rush to get rid of me? I asked, keeping my tone even. Rush? No, no. It's nothing like that. I don't want you to stress about things. Look, I've got a late meeting tomorrow, so if you do come back, I might not be around anyway. Just take your time. A late meeting. My son worked regular hours. He never had late meetings. It was the kind of excuse a teenager would make up when sneaking out, flimsy and unconvincing. I played along. All right, I said slowly. Maybe I'll stay another night. He sighed in relief. Good. Good. That's perfect. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the phone in my hand. My son was hiding something, and now I knew exactly what it was. The next evening, Frankie drove out to the meeting spot, a deserted parking lot on the edge of town. I sat in his passenger seat, nerves buzzing through me. He had insisted I come only as far as the car but stay hidden. You'll see soon enough, he said, his voice calm, steady, reassuring. From where I sat, I could see the lot under the yellow glow of a street lamp. My son was already there, pacing beside my Buick, his hands in his pockets. My stomach twisted at the sight. There it was, my car, polished and shining as if dressed for its own funeral. Frankie stepped out, casual and confident, a roll of cash tucked into his jacket pocket. Evening, he called. My son straightened, plastering on a smile. You must be here for the Buick. That's right, Frankie said, circling the car, inspecting it with exaggerated interest. She looks even better in person. Run smooth, my son said quickly. One owner, well maintained. You won't find a better deal. From the car, I could barely breathe. The words cut into me. One owner. He said it without a flicker of shame, as though I didn't exist. Frankie nodded slowly. Paperwork in order? Of course, my son said, producing a folder. Signed and ready. We can close right here. Frankie flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. Then he handed over the cash. Not all of it, just enough to make the deal look real. My son took it eagerly, eyes darting nervously around the lot. When it was done, Frankie shook his hand. Pleasure doing business, he said. His tone smooth but edged with something my son didn't catch. The moment Frankie got back into the car, he drove us straight to a nearby office where a lawyer, an old friend of his apparently, was waiting. He handed over the folder without hesitation. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Grant, flipped through the documents quickly, her frown deepening with every page. This, she said finally, closing the folder with a snap, is invalid. Completely illegal. Whoever signed this had no authority to sell the car. The vehicle is registered to you, Ricky. Your son has no legal claim. By pushing this sale, he has committed fraud. The word hung in the air. Fraud. I felt the blood rush in my ears. Hearing it confirmed what I already knew in my gut, but it still landed like a blow. Frankie leaned back, his arms crossed. So what you're telling us is, we can nail him for this. Mrs. Grant nodded. If you want to pursue it, yes. There's a clear case here. Attempted fraud at the very least, possibly more depending on how much evidence you gather. The fact that money exchanged hands strengthens it. Frankie turned to me, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. You hear that, Ricky? We've got him. He tried to cheat you, his own father. Now we can teach him a lesson he'll never forget. I sat in silence, staring at the folder. The pages inside were covered in my son's handwriting, his signature, his attempt to pass off what wasn't his. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the anger was something heavier, something harder to admit. This was my son. my only child. The thought of dragging him into court, of hearing his name read out in front of strangers, of branding him with words like fraud and criminal, it tore at me. Part of me screamed that he deserved it, that he needed to understand he couldn't treat me this way. But another part, the part that still remembered holding him as a boy, teaching him to ride a bike, sitting with him in that very car he'd tried to sell, that part hesitated. Frankie slammed his fist on the table. Don't you dare go soft on him now. He's been pushing you for years, and this time he went too far. If you don't stand up to him, he'll strip everything you own. Do you want to lose your house next? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't know. When Mrs. Grant, the lawyer, finished explaining the legal ground beneath my feet, the room felt suffocating. She spoke in that precise, clipped tone of professionals who know their words carry weight, and every word felt like a hammer. Fraud, illegal, lawsuit, evidence. My son's name wasn't on a single paper, wasn't attached to any rightful claim, yet there it was in her voice, tangled with crime. I sat there, staring at the folder as though the pages inside could burn a hole straight through my chest. My own son, my only child, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders through crowded fairs, the teenager I'd helped build a school project late into the night, the young man I'd watched walk down the aisle. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, a misunderstanding, but the evidence was as clear as the dent in the Buick's fender. Undeniable, irrefutable. Frankie's voice boomed beside me. We've got him. Now let's crush him. This isn't just a son being foolish. This is theft. This is betrayal. You go easy on him now, Ricky, and you'll regret it. Tomorrow it won't just be the car. It'll be your house. And the day after, he'll be knocking on the bank's door, borrowing against your name. I lifted my eyes to Frankie's, seeing the fire there, the unshakable sense of justice that had always made him larger than life. He was right. But he wasn't the father. I was. I exhaled slowly, my voice quiet but steady. We'll do it. We'll file. But not yet. Before I take a step that big, I want to look him in the eyes. I want to see if he even realizes what he's done. Frankie scowled, muttering about wasted time, but he didn't argue. He knew I had made up my mind. The drive back home was nothing like the one that had carried me to Frankie's birthday. The hum of the engine, the sweep of the fields. None of it felt light anymore. My thoughts were heavy, crowding the car until I could barely breathe. I remembered my son as a boy, how he used to sit in the back seat of that very Buick, kicking the leather with his shoes until I scolded him. I remembered the way his eyes lit up when I surprised him with a bike, how he rode it down the street shouting, "Look at me, Dad." Where had that boy gone? The miles passed, and the weight in my chest grew heavier. By the time I pulled into my street, it felt like a stone pressing against my ribs. But the sight of my house hit me harder than anything else. Something looked wrong. At first it was subtle. A curtain drawn differently, the faint glint of something cheap behind the window. But as I stepped out of the car and walked to the door, my stomach sank lower and lower. The air itself felt strange, as though the house was no longer mine but some replica dressed in its skin. I unlocked the door, and the truth slammed into me. Gone. The paintings. The ones I had collected over years, each chosen not just for beauty but for memory, stripped from the walls. The vibrant landscape from our trip to Italy. The still life from that gallery my wife had adored. The portrait I had bargained for at an auction, proud to finally bring something fine into our modest home. In their place, thin, generic prints in plastic frames hung crookedly. Pictures of flowers that had never existed, colors so garish they hurt the eyes. The vases were gone, too. The porcelain pieces my wife and I had found in antique shops on trips. delicate blues and whites, etched with scenes of rivers and mountains, replaced by mass-produced glass jars still smelling faintly of glue and dust. And the furniture, the heavy oak table that had borne the weight of family dinners, arguments, laughter, the homework my son had once scribbled on its surface when he thought I wouldn't notice, replaced with particle board imitations. Chairs so light I could lift them with one hand, their legs wobbling on the floorboards. A sofa that sagged with stuffing that looked ready to spill. It was as though a stranger had broken into my life, gutted it, and replaced it with a cheap performance of what living looked like. I stood in the middle of it all, my hands trembling, my throat dry. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was mocking. And then he appeared. "Dad!" My son walked in from the kitchen, smiling as though I should be grateful. His arms spread wide as if unveiling a gift. "You're back earlier than I thought." I stared at him, my voice low, each word pulled from somewhere deep. "Where is everything?" He beamed, nodding as if I had complimented him. "I took care of it. The car, the paintings, the old heavy furniture, all of it. You don't need to worry about those things anymore. I've relieved you of your burden. This house was suffocating you. Now it's light, simple. Look at it. Doesn't it feel freer?" My jaw tightened. "Freer? You gutted my life and replaced it with junk. You stripped this house of its soul." He frowned, defensive now. "You're clinging to the past, Dad. You don't need those things. They're just objects. I converted them into something useful." "Useful?" My voice rose, the calm cracking. "Those objects were memories. They were history. They were mine. You had no right." He crossed his arms, puffing up as though he were the reasonable one. "I did what needed to be done. You're too sentimental to make hard choices. I sold them, all of them. And I didn't waste the money. I invested it in my business. That money is going to grow, Dad. One day, you'll thank me." There it was again. "You'll thank me." The same phrase he had repeated like a mantra, as if it excused everything. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "Where is the money?" His chin lifted proudly. "Working for me now. For us. It's all in the business. You should be proud. You funded something that will last longer than a dusty painting or an old chair." For a moment I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, my thoughts racing with anger and disbelief. He had reduced decades of my life to dusty things. He had stolen not just property, but dignity, and dressed it as a favor. But then, slowly, a calm settled over me. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence before a storm. I smiled. My son blinked, confused. "You think you've relieved me of a burden," I said softly. "You think you've done me a favor." He nodded quickly, eager now. "Exactly. Finally, you see it." But I kept smiling, letting the silence stretch, letting him wonder. Then I leaned closer, my voice quiet, deliberate. "But you forgot one important detail." His smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I just held the smile, steady and unshaken, as the weight of those words hung between us. And then I laughed, low and sharp, because now, finally, he had no idea what was coming. The silence stretched between us, long and suffocating, as though the gutted house itself was listening. My son stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, his expression flickering between smugness and irritation. I had been silent too long in his eyes. He thought I would fold, that I would mutter some half-hearted protest and then retreat into my corner. That was the role I had played too often, the quiet father, the man who avoided conflict for the sake of peace. But this time my words came sharp, deliberate, carrying the weight of years. "You forgot one important detail," I told him. And for the first time in a long time, his composure cracked. He blinked, frowned, then tried to smile again, as though to cover the unease spreading across his face. Dad, what detail? You're upset, that's all. You'll calm down. I stepped closer, letting my eyes roam deliberately over the cheap prints on the walls, the flimsy chairs, the hollow vases that mocked the beauty of what once stood here. The detail you forgot, I said slowly, is that I am not as blind as you think I am. You thought you were moving pieces in secret, but I saw the whole board. He laughed lightly, a hollow sound. You're talking like this is some kind of war. It's not. I did what needed to be done. You'll see that one day. I shook my head. Number I see clearly right now. I walked to the table and pulled open the drawer where I had tucked away the folder Frankie had given me. My son's eyes followed me, and for the first time there was a flicker of unease. I placed the folder on the table and opened it, spreading the papers across the surface. You recognize this? I asked. He leaned forward, then stiffened. His face shifted, first confusion, then recognition, then irritation as though I had spoiled a game he thought he was winning. This, I said, tapping the papers, is everything you used to try and sell my car. The listing, the signatures, the supposed transfer of ownership. And you know what I found out? They're invalid. Every last one. Worthless. He scoffed, trying to wave it off. Dad, don't be dramatic. I just arranged the sale. I knew you'd never do it yourself. You'll thank me one day when you see the money working instead of sitting in a hunk of metal in the driveway. No. My voice cut sharp, and his words stumbled. The vases, the paintings, the furniture, they hurt, yes. They cut me deep, because those things held the pieces of my life. But in the end, they are objects, and objects can be replaced, however poorly. I will carry the memory of them inside me, even if you strip them from this house. I will survive that. I leaned closer, my voice low, deliberate. But the car was different. The car was mine in a way you will never understand. It carried me through my life, through decades of work, through nights I came home exhausted, through trips with your mother, through journeys with you when you were still a boy asking questions in the passenger seat. That car was not a burden. It was a companion. And you, I jabbed my finger against the papers. You tried to erase me from it, to cut me out, to make it yours to dispose of. That is not just selfish. That is unforgivable. He shifted, uncomfortable, but forced a grin anyway. Dad, it's just a car. You're making this bigger than it is. No, I said firmly, straightening. It is exactly as big as it is. You crossed a line and there is no going back from it. He tried again, leaning on the old tricks he had always used. Dad, come on. You've always said things are just things. You taught me not to get attached to objects. That car was falling apart. I did you a favor. You're angry now, but in time, you'll realize I was right. Don't twist my words. My voice rose, sharper now, years of silence finally breaking. Yes, I told you not to value objects above people, but what did you do? You valued money above me. You sold the life I built to fund your schemes. That isn't care. That isn't love. That is greed. He crossed his arms again, defensive. I invested the money in my business. That's not greed, it's vision. I'm thinking of the future, our future. You'll see when the returns come in. Our future? I spat the words. Tell me, what part of this business is mine? My name isn't on it. My hands don't touch it. You took my things, my history, and shoved them into your pocket. You talk about the future, but the only one you're building is your own. You didn't relieve me of a burden. You relieved yourself of restraint. His jaw tightened, but he tried one more smile, forced and brittle. Dad, you're overreacting. I've done what you couldn't. I've acted. You'll calm down. I tapped the papers again. Do you know what these mean? They mean you committed fraud. You sold something that was never yours to sell. You forged the right to speak in my place. And I knew, from the very beginning, I watched it play out. I let it happen because I wanted to see just how far you would go. And now, I know. His face paled for a fraction of a second before he masked it with another grin. Fraud? You're talking like a lawyer now. No court will take this seriously. You wouldn't even go that far. I already spoke to a lawyer, I said quietly, each word striking like a hammer. The sale was invalid. Every document you touched collapses under the law, and yes, I will sue you. He laughed, a sharp, mocking sound, but his voice carried a faint edge of desperation. You? Sue me? Dad? Don't be ridiculous. You're my father. No father drags his son into court. You're angry now, but tomorrow you'll wake up and remember who I am. You'll remember that you love me, and you'll let it go. You always let it go. I stared at him, and for the first time in years, I felt the old steel in me, the steel that had carried me through boardrooms, through negotiations where men tried to eat me alive. I had learned to survive in those rooms, to hold my ground against people sharper, tougher, more ruthless than me. And now, standing in front of my own son, I realized he had mistaken my silence for weakness. Not this time, I said softly. Not ever again. The words landed heavy, but he kept his grin plastered on his face, as though clinging to it would keep him safe. You'll calm down, Dad. You'll see. You don't have it in you. You'll never follow through. I smiled back, calm, steady, unshaken. Watch me. And in that moment, the line between us was drawn, sharper than it had ever been. Father and son, no longer bound by trust, but by betrayal and the promise of reckoning. The days between my confrontation with my son and the court date passed like slow-moving thunderclouds. Each morning I woke with a knot in my stomach, questioning if I had gone too far. But then I would walk into the hollowed-out living room, look at the cheap replacement staring back at me, and the knot hardened into resolve. No, I hadn't gone too far. He had. It was Frankie who kept me steady. He visited every day, bringing his blunt humor and unwavering loyalty. "Don't you dare back out," he said one afternoon as we sat on my porch. "If you do, he'll walk all over you again, and the next time, you won't have anything left." I nodded, though my chest ached with the weight of it. "I know, but it still feels like I'm dragging my own blood through the mud." Frankie leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. He made his choice. You're just showing him the cost." When the trial date came, Frankie was at my side, dressed in his best suit, looking more like a bodyguard than a friend. My son was already at the courthouse when we arrived. He spotted us from across the hallway, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. For a moment, he stood frozen, as though expecting me to laugh and tell him this was just some elaborate lesson. But when I didn't smile, when he saw the folder in my hand, his face changed. "Dad," he said quickly, striding toward me. His voice was lower, softer, the kind of tone he hadn't used since he was a teenager caught sneaking in late. "Dad, listen, we don't have to do this. I made mistakes, I admit it. But we can settle this between us. You don't need to drag this out in front of strangers." Frankie snorted. Now he remembers how to apologize. My son shot him a glare, but turned back to me, his face full of strained sincerity. "Dad, please. You're my father. You don't want this. You don't want people whispering about us. I'll fix it, I swear. Just drop the suit." I looked at him, at the son who had gutted my home, who had stood in this very house smiling while he robbed me of my life. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. "I gave you chances," I said quietly. "Years of them. You chose this path. Now you'll walk it." His face hardened, the mask slipping. His voice dropped sharp and venomous. "You think this is the end? You think you can humiliate me like this and I'll just let it go? You and your friend here?" He jabbed a finger at Frankie. "You won't get away with this. I'll make sure of it." Frankie chuckled darkly, stepping forward until he loomed over him. "You don't scare me, kid. And you sure as hell don't scare your father anymore." My son's jaw tightened, but before he could spit more venom, the bailiff called us in. The courtroom was cool, sterile, stripped of personality in a way that made every sound echo louder than it should. The judge sat high above, her gaze sharp and unyielding. We took our places, me beside Mrs. Grant, Frankie behind us like a silent sentinel, and my son with his own lawyer, a man who looked more tired than fierce. The case began. Mrs. Grant spoke first, her voice calm but cutting as she laid out the facts. The car, listed without authorization, the fraudulent documents signed without right, the antiques and furniture sold without consent, the evidence, all lined up in neat order. When she placed the false documents on the table, the judge lifted her brows, unimpressed. "And these were signed by the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mrs. Grant replied. "Despite having no legal authority over the property in question, this is a clear act of fraud." My son's lawyer muttered something about misunderstanding, about family disputes blown out of proportion, but the judge cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Fraud is not a misunderstanding." For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic cross my son's face. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "Your Honor," I began, my voice rough, "I worked for 40 years to build the life I had. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes as a father, as a husband. But I built a home. I filled it with things that mattered, things that carried memory. My son didn't see value in them. He saw only money. He stripped my life bare, piece by piece, and he smiled while he did it." I paused, swallowing hard, then continued. "The paintings, the vases, the furniture, they're gone. Maybe they can't be replaced. But the car, that was different. He didn't just sell it. He tried to erase me from it. He forged what wasn't his. That is why we're here. Because if I let this go, he'll believe he can take anything. And I can't let that happen." The courtroom was silent when I finished. My son shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched. When his turn came, he tried the act again. The apologetic son, the misunderstood victim. He spoke of doing what was best for me, of trying to simplify my life, of investing in the future. But his words fell flat. The judge's eyes narrowed as she looked at him. "You speak of burden," she said evenly. "But from where I stand, you didn't relieve your father of anything. You relieved him of his rights. That is not vision. That is theft." My son's face flushed red, and for a brief moment his mask cracked again. His eyes flicked toward me, filled with anger, resentment, and something else. Fear. By the time the arguments closed, the path was clear. The court would decide not only on the fraudulent car sale, but also on the broader theft of property. Mrs. Grant's demand was straightforward: full compensation for the value of the car, the paintings, the vases, the furniture, every item taken without consent. I sat in silence, my hands folded, watching my son squirm under the weight of his own actions. Part of me still hurt, the father in me that remembered the boy he once was. But another part, the part that had been silent too long, felt something close to peace. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And whether he believed it or not, this was love too. The kind of love that refused to let him walk further down a path that would destroy him. The courthouse air still clung to me when I returned home, thick and sour in my lungs, A reminder that justice was now something strangers in robes and suits would weigh for me. Frankie had driven me back, his voice steady and full of reassurance, but when I stepped into the house and closed the door behind me, silence swallowed everything he had said. I stood in the entryway for a long while, listening. The house didn't hum the way it used to. It didn't have the familiar weight of memory. No, it felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out its heart and left me inside a shell. The trial had been exhausting, yes, but what gnawed at me now wasn't the court or the judge or the evidence. It was something else. A nagging thought, a pull, subtle but relentless, tugging me upward, toward the attic. The attic had always been a private place. Not the kind of space where guests might wander, not even where my son had ever spent much time. It wasn't for storage of the ordinary, not for winter coats or old boxes of dishes. It was for the fragile things, the irreplaceable things. I hesitated at the base of the ladder, staring up at the hatch. My knees ached at the thought of climbing, but the pull was stronger. My hand gripped the ladder, and slowly, step by step, I hauled myself upward, each creak of the wood sounding louder than it should have. When I pushed open the hatch and pulled myself inside, the air hit me first, stale, thick with dust, tinged with the faint scent of wood. It was familiar, comforting in a way. But then my eyes adjusted, and the comfort shattered. It was empty. Not just tidied, not just reduced, empty. The shelves where boxes had been stacked for decades, bare. The trunks that had rested in the corner since my youth, gone. The floor, where faint footprints in the dust had always circled around objects that sat untouched, now a smooth, uninterrupted blanket of gray. And the far wall, that was where I had kept it. One box, carefully placed, untouched, since the day my wife passed. I had never opened it since. I couldn't. The pain of it was too sharp, but I knew what was inside. I staggered toward the spot, my chest tightening, my hands shaking. The floor bore the mark of its absence, a rectangle of clean wood surrounded by dust. It had sat there so long that the space itself remembered it. But now, it was gone. That box had been hers. Inside were the fragments of her life that I couldn't bear to scatter. Her sketchbooks, full of drawings she made late at night when she thought no one was watching. Her scarf, soft and faintly perfumed, that she used to drape over her shoulders on cool evenings. Letters folded with care, exchanged during our courtship. And photographs, dozens of them. The evidence of a life, of laughter, of love. I had packed it the week after her funeral. My hands had trembled as I folded her scarf, as I slipped the photos into envelopes. I had told myself I would open it again one day, when the pain was less sharp. But I never did. It was too much. So the box remained in the attic, untouched but alive. A quiet shrine that I visited with my eyes, never with my hands. And now, it was gone. Not stolen by strangers in the night. Not lost in fire or flood. No, it was taken by my own son. And he hadn't even looked inside. To him it had been nothing but another box, another piece of clutter to be cleared out, another few bills to pocket for his business. He had sold her memory, sold her presence, sold the last fragments of her hand in this world as though they were trash. The air in the attic grew thin, as if it were pressing out of my lungs. I stumbled to the floor, sitting hard on the wood, my eyes fixed on the empty space. Memories flooded me. Her laugh, sharp and soft at once, filling a room. The way she sat with her pencil, biting her lip as she sketched lines that only she understood. The evenings when she wrapped that scarf around her shoulders, humming in the kitchen. The way she leaned against me during long drives in the Buick, her hand resting on mine over the gear shift. All of it lived in that box, and he had sold it. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the emptiness. My knees ached, my back screamed, but I couldn't move. Tears pricked at my eyes, but they weren't the soft tears of grief. They were jagged, burning, fueled by rage. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about possessions. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was desecration. When I finally climbed down the ladder, I felt hollow and cold. The living room, with its cheap prints and flimsy furniture, looked worse now, crueler somehow. And there he was. My son sat in the kitchen, hunched over his phone, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. He didn't even look up when I entered. "How could you?" My voice rasped, low, hoarse. He glanced up lazily, his brows raised. "How could I what?" "The attic," I said, each word like a stone. "The box. You sold it." Recognition flickered across his face, but only for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Yeah, it was just a box of old junk. You should be glad I cleared it out. That stuff wasn't doing you any good." My chest tightened, my hands trembling. "That was your mother's, her drawings, her photos, her life." He rolled his eyes, sighing as though I were a stubborn child. "Dad, she's gone. Keeping junk doesn't bring her back. You need to move on. I did you a favor." A favor. The word cut through me. I stepped closer, my voice sharper than it had ever been. "Do you even hear yourself? You sold her. You didn't just strip this house. You stripped her. You took what little of her I had left, and you tossed it aside like trash. That isn't a favor. That is unforgivable." His mouth twisted into a smirk, though his eyes flickered uneasily. "You're being dramatic. It was just stuff. You'll thank me one day." "No," I said, my voice steady now, colder than I thought possible. "I will never thank you. Not for this. You've taken everything. And now?" I drew a long breath. "You're no longer my son." That made him look up, truly look, his smirk faltering. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." My voice didn't waver. "You severed it yourself. Whatever bond we had, you destroyed it the moment you sold that box. You're nothing to me now." He laughed bitterly, though his voice cracked. "You don't mean that." I turned my back to him, walking toward the door. "I've never meant anything more." That night, I sat in the stripped living room. The silence pressed in, but it was different now. It wasn't the oppressive silence of loneliness. It was the silence of finality. My son was gone to me. Not dead, but gone. And for the first time, I felt a terrible, painful peace. Because now I knew. There was no turning back.